The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor of the Grand Rosewood Hotel as I watched my bride-to-be, Rachel Martinez, passionately kissing another man in the corner of our wedding reception. Not just any man, Tyler Brooks, her ex-boyfriend. From college, the same guy she swore meant nothing to her anymore. The same guy she insisted was just a friend when she added him to our guest list 3 weeks ago. The same guy who was now running his hands through her perfectly styled wedding hair. While 200 of our friends and family members danced obliviously just 30 feet away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My hands trembled as I stood frozen behind the ice sculpture, watching the woman I'd spent 3 years planning to marry destroy everything we'd built together. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the way she threw her head back and laughed at something he whispered in her ear, the same laugh she used to save just for me. The lace of her designer wedding dress, the one that cost more than I made in 6 months at my family's restaurant, brushed against his expensive suit as they swayed together like they were the only 2 people in the room. 3 months earlier, everything seemed perfect in my relationship with Rachel Martinez. We'd been together since our sophomore year at Millbrook Community College, and despite coming from completely different worlds, I thought we'd found something real. Rachel came from the kind of family that took annual trips to Europe and drove cars that cost more than most people's houses. Her father, Robert, owned a chain of successful medical practices across Connecticut, and her mother, Patricia, was a former beauty queen who now ran charity galas for the wealthy elite of Millbrook. Meanwhile, I was David Chin, son of immigrants who poured their entire lives into a small Chinese restaurant called Golden Dragon on the less fashionable side of town. My parents, James and Susan, worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week, saving every penny so I could get an education they never had the chance to pursue. While Rachel's Instagram was filled with designer handbags and weekend trips to Manhattan, my evenings were spent washing dishes and taking orders, trying to help my family stay afloat while completing my business degree. But Rachel always told me that none of that mattered. She'd come to the restaurant after her classes, sitting in our worn vinyl booths and claiming she loved the authentic atmosphere. She'd post pictures of our cheap dates to local parks and coffee shops, captioning them with quotes about how real love doesn't need expensive things. Her friends from her sorority would sometimes join us. While they'd make snide comments about the neighborhood or wrinkle their noses at the smell of cooking oil that clung to my clothes, Rachel would defend me fiercely. David works harder than any of you will ever understand, she'd snap at them. He's going to be incredibly successful someday, and he's going to remember who was there for him when it mattered. I believed her completely. When she said yes to my proposal with a modest ring I'd saved 8 months to afford, I thought we were building something beautiful together. The ring wasn't the 3-carat diamond her sorority sisters flaunted, but she wore it proudly and told everyone who'd listen about how much thought I'd put into choosing it. She even posted a long Instagram story about how the size of a ring doesn't reflect the size of love, which got hundreds of supportive comments from her followers. Planning our wedding became an exercise in compromise and creative budgeting. Rachel's parents offered to pay for most of the reception at the Grand Rosewood Hotel, insisting that their only daughter deserved a proper celebration. My parents, despite their limited means, insisted on contributing what they could, even though it meant taking out a small loan against the restaurant. The guest list grew from our original plan of 50 people to over 200, mostly Rachel's extended family and her parents' business associates. It's just one day, Rachel would say, whenever I expressed concern about the mounting costs, and my parents are happy to help. They love you, David. They see how happy you make me. Parents were polite to me, certainly, but I often caught subtle looks between them when they thought I wasn't paying attention. During family dinners at their sprawling colonial home, conversation would inevitably turn to Rachel's college friends, who were dating medical students or law students or young executives at investment firms. They'd ask about my plans after graduation, with the kind of careful politeness that barely masked their concern about their daughter's choice in partners. David's going to help expand his family's business, Rachel would say, squeezing my hand under their mahogany dining table. He has incredible ideas for franchising and modernization. You should see his business plan. What she didn't mention was that my business plan involves slowly growing Golden Dragon into maybe 2 or 3 locations over the next decade. Hardly the kind of explosive success story that would impress the Martinez family's social circle. But Rachel seemed genuinely excited about our future together, spending hours talking about how we'd travel together once the business was established, how we'd raise our children to appreciate both cultures, how we'd prove that love really could conquer the differences in our backgrounds. The first real warning sign came 6 weeks before our wedding. When Rachel's maid of honor, Lisa Park, pulled me aside after our rehearsal dinner. Lisa had been Rachel's roommate in college and her closest friend since freshman year. She was the kind of person who measured everyone by their social media following and their ability to get into exclusive parties. But she'd always been civil to me for Rachel's sake. "David, can I talk to you for a minute?" she asked, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her wine glass as the rest of the wedding party mingled in the private dining room my parents had reserved at Golden Dragon. We stepped outside into the warm Connecticut evening, and Lisa's expression shifted from her usual bright smile to something more serious. "Look, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Are you sure you can make Rachel happy, long term?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean? We've been together for 3 years. Wouldn't be getting married if we weren't sure about each other." Lisa sighed and looked back through the window at Rachel, who was laughing at something. My cousin Marcus had said while helping herself to another spring roll, "Rachel's used to a certain lifestyle, David. She's used to nice things, nice places, nice experiences. I know she says she doesn't care about money, but that's easy to say when you've never had to worry about it." "We've talked about this extensively," I replied, trying to keep the defensive edge out of my voice. "Rachel knows exactly what she's signing up for. She's seen how hard my family works, and she respects that." "But have you seen how she talks when you're not around?" Lisa pressed. "At the sorority reunions, at the charity events her mom drags her to, she talks about you like you're this exciting project, this diamond in the rough that she's going to help polish into something special. What happens when she realizes that this is who you are, David? What happens when she gets tired of waiting for you to become the successful businessman she's convinced herself you're going to be?" I wanted to dismiss Lisa's concerns as jealousy or snobbery, but something in her tone suggested she was genuinely trying to warn me about something. Still, I'd made my choice, and Rachel had made hers. We were getting married in 6 weeks, and I wasn't about to let her friend's cold feet derail our plans. "Rachel and I love each other," I said simply. "Everything else is just details we'll figure out together." Lisa studied my face for a long moment, then shrugged. "I hope you're right, David, I really do. But if you're wrong, it's going to hurt both of you more than you can imagine." 3 weeks later, Rachel came home from lunch with Lisa, carrying a small stack of additional wedding invitations to be sent out at the last minute. "I know we said we were done with the guest list," she said, not quite meeting my eyes as she set the invitations on our kitchen counter, "but there are just a few more people I really want to have there." I picked up the top invitation and felt my stomach drop when I saw the name written in Rachel's careful handwriting, Tyler Brooks. Tyler had been Rachel's boyfriend for most of their junior year of college. Smooth-talking business major from a wealthy family who drove a BMW and spent spring breaks in Cabo. Rachel had told me about him early in our relationship. Him as a mistake she'd made when she was young and stupid and impressed by all the wrong things. "Tyler Brooks?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I thought you said you hadn't talked to him in over a year." Rachel busied herself with organizing the other invitations, still not looking directly at me. "I ran into him at the country club last weekend when I was there with my mom. He's back in town working at premium auto sales, and he asked about the wedding. It would be weird not to invite him, don't you think? We're together for almost 2 years." Something in her tone made me uneasy, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. "If you want him there, that's fine with me. I trust you completely." Rachel finally looked up at me then, and her smile was so bright and genuine that I pushed my concerns aside. "I love you so much for being understanding about this, David. Tyler means absolutely nothing to me now, but he was part of my life for a while, and I want him to see how happy I am with the right person." The wedding day itself started perfectly. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the bridal suite at the Grand Rosewood Hotel as Rachel and her bridesmaids got ready, their laughter echoing through the luxurious room. My parents had arrived early to help with the final preparations, my mother wearing the elegant navy dress Rachel had helped her pick out. My father, uncomfortable but proud in his rented tuxedo. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," my mother whispered to Rachel as she adjusted her veil, tears in her eyes. Despite their initial concerns about our different backgrounds, my parents had come to genuinely love Rachel over the years. They appreciated how she always asked about their health, how she remembered their anniversary, how she seemed to genuinely care about their hopes and dreams for the restaurant. The ceremony itself was everything we dreamed it would be. Rachel walked down the aisle in her stunning dress, her face radiant behind her veil. And for a moment, all my worries about money and social differences melted away. This was the woman I loved, promising to build a life with me in front of everyone who mattered to us. When we exchanged vows, her voice was steady and clear as she promised to love me in wealth and in poverty, in success and in struggle, for all the days of our lives. The reception started smoothly, with our families and friends mingling more easily than I dared to hope. My college roommate Marcus gave a heartfelt best man speech about how Rachel had made me happier than he'd ever seen me, while Lisa's maid of honor speech focused on Rachel's loyalty and determination to follow her heart regardless of what others might think. But as the evening progressed, I began to notice Rachel spending more and more time away from our head table. At first, she was just making rounds to thank guests for coming, which seemed perfectly normal. But when I looked for her during the father-daughter dance, she was nowhere to be found. My new father-in-law, Robert, looked confused as he waited on the dance floor, finally approaching me to ask if I knew where his daughter had gone. She said she needed to powder her nose, I told him, scanning the ballroom. She should be back any minute. But 15 minutes passed, then 30, and Rachel still hadn't returned. I was starting to get genuinely worried when I decided to check the hotel lobby, thinking maybe she'd stepped outside for some fresh air. That's when I saw her through the glass doors leading to the garden terrace, and my world came crashing down around me. Rachel was pressed against Tyler Brooks in an intimate embrace that left no room for innocent interpretation. His hands were tangled in her wedding veil as they kissed with the kind of desperate passion that spoke of history, of unfinished business, of everything she'd claimed was dead and buried between them. The garden lights cast romantic shadows across their figures, creating the perfect backdrop for what should have been her first dance with her new husband. Not a clandestine reunion with the man she'd supposedly gotten over years ago. I stood frozen behind the glass doors, my wedding ring feeling suddenly heavy on my finger as I watched my wife of 3 hours betray everything we'd just promised each other in front of God and 200 witnesses. The worst part wasn't even the kiss itself, though that felt like a knife twisting in my chest. It was the way she melted into him, the way her body language spoke of comfort and familiarity, the way she seemed to transform into someone I didn't recognize the moment she was in his arms. Tyler pulled back first, his hand still gripping her waist as he said something that made her laugh softly. That laugh, the one I'd fallen in love with during late-night study sessions in the college library, now sounded like mockery echoing through the garden. Rachel reached up to adjust his tie, a gesture so intimate and practiced that it was clear this wasn't their first moment alone together since his return to Millbrook. I forced myself to step back from the doors before they could see me, my mind racing with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. How long had this been going on? Had their encounter at the country club really been a coincidence? Or had they been planning this reunion? Was our entire wedding day just an elaborate charade, while she figured out how to get back together with the man she'd never actually gotten over? The rational part of my brain told me to confront them immediately, to march out there and demand an explanation while the evidence was still fresh. But something held me back, some instinct that told me I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening before I made any moves I couldn't take back. If Rachel was capable of this level of deception on our wedding day, what else had she been hiding from me? I made my way back to the reception, forcing a smile as guests approached me with congratulations and questions about when Rachel and I were planning to start a family. Each well-meaning comment felt like salt in an open wound, but I managed to maintain the facade of a happy groom while my mind churned with betrayal and confusion. "David, there you are," Lisa Park appeared at my elbow, her maid of honor duties, apparently extending to keeping track of both the bride and groom. Your dad is looking for you. Something about the final payment to the caterers? I nodded numbly and followed her toward the head table, where my father was indeed waiting with a concerned expression. As the evening wore on, and Rachel eventually returned from her garden rendezvous, looking perfectly composed and offering a bright excuse about needing air after all the excitement, I began to notice things I'd been blind to before. The way Lisa's eyes followed Tyler whenever he moved through the crowd, the knowing glances exchanged between Rachel and her college sorority sisters when they thought no one was watching, the way Rachel's mother, Patricia, seemed unusually tense every time she looked in Tyler's direction, as if she knew exactly what kind of complications his presence might bring. Most telling of all was Rachel's behavior for the rest of the reception. Where she'd been warm and affectionate with me during the ceremony, now she seemed distant and distracted. When we finally had our first dance as husband and wife, she went through the motions mechanically, smiling for the photographers but barely making eye contact with me. "Are you feeling all right?" I asked as we swayed to the song we'd chosen together months ago, a romantic ballad that now felt hollow and meaningless. "Just overwhelmed," she replied, but her eyes were scanning the crowd over my shoulder. "It's been such a long day, and there are so many people to talk to. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When the song ended and we separated to mingle with our guests, I watched Rachel gravitate toward Tyler's table like a moth to a flame. She lingered there longer than anywhere else, her laughter coming more easily, her posture more relaxed. Tyler, for his part, seemed completely at ease, charming not just Rachel, but her entire extended family with stories about his new position at the luxury car dealership and his plans for expanding into the Connecticut market. Quite a success story that Tyler Brooks, Rachel's uncle, commented to me during the cake cutting. Robert was just telling me about the commission he made last month selling that new Lamborghini to the tech executive from Hartford. It must be nice to have that kind of natural sales ability. I smiled and nodded, but inside, I was beginning to understand the real reason Rachel had been so insistent on inviting her ex-boyfriend to our wedding. Tyler wasn't just back in town. He was back and apparently thriving in exactly the kind of high-earning, prestigious career that would appeal to someone with Rachel's values and aspirations. The revelation became even clearer when I overheard a conversation between Rachel and her college roommate Jennifer during the bouquet toss. They were standing near the bar, speaking in hushed tones that suggested they didn't want to be overheard. "I can't believe how good he looks," Jennifer was saying. "And that car he drove here tonight? That's easily a $100,000 vehicle." "I know," Rachel replied, her voice carrying a wistfulness that made my stomach clench. "He always said he was going to make something of himself, and he actually did it." "So what are you going to do?" Jennifer pressed. "You just married David, but it's obvious you still have feelings for Tyler." Rachel was quiet for a long moment, absently twisting her new wedding ring around her finger. "I don't know. I thought I was over him completely, but seeing him again, seeing how successful he's become, it's making me question everything." "Well, you can't exactly get an annulment based on your ex-boyfriend's career prospects," Jennifer said with a laugh that held no real humor. "Besides, David's a good guy. He adores you." "David is a good guy," Rachel agreed, but there was a but hanging in the air that she didn't voice. "He works hard, and he loves me, and his family has been nothing but welcoming." "But Jennifer, what if I settled? What if I convinced myself that love was enough, when really I was just scared of being alone?" The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been preparing myself for something like this since witnessing their kiss in the garden. To hear her describe our 3-year relationship, our wedding day, our entire future together as settling was almost more than I could bear. I moved away from the bar before they could notice me listening, but the damage was already done. The woman I'd just married was having second thoughts about our entire relationship, and it wasn't because of anything I'd done wrong. It was because Tyler Brooks had come back into her life with the kind of success and wealth that made her question whether she'd made the right choice in choosing love over money. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of forced smiles and hollow congratulations. Rachel and I cut the cake together, posed for endless photos, and thanked our guests for celebrating with us. All while I struggled with the knowledge that my marriage was falling apart before it had even truly begun. When Tyler finally approached me near the end of the evening, I wasn't sure what to expect. He'd been careful to avoid me for most of the night, focusing his attention on Rachel and her family while maintaining the polite distance expected of an ex-boyfriend at a wedding. "David, congratulations," he said, extending his hand with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. "Rachel looks absolutely stunning tonight. You're a very lucky man." I shook his hand and managed to keep my voice steady as I replied, "Thank you for coming, Tyler. Rachel was excited to have you here. She's always been special," he continued, his eyes finding Rachel across the room where she was saying goodbye to her grandparents. "I'm glad she found happiness with you. I hope you two have a wonderful honeymoon. Where are you headed?" "Santorini," I replied, though the word felt strange in my mouth now. Our honeymoon, which I'd been looking forward to for months, now seemed like a cruel joke. Tyler's eyebrows rose appreciatively. "Santorini? That's quite a choice for a restaurant worker." Rachel always did have expensive taste. There was something in his tone, a subtle condescension that suggested he knew exactly how much strain the honeymoon was putting on my finances. I wondered if Rachel had confided in him about our budget constraints, about how we'd had to save for over a year to afford the trip, but how my parents had quietly contributed money they couldn't really spare to help make it possible. "Rachel deserves the best," I said simply, not trusting myself to say more without revealing how much his comment had stung. "She certainly does," Tyler agreed, and there was no mistaking the implication in his words. "Well, I should be going. Early day tomorrow at the dealership. But David, if you ever need anything at all, don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be happy to help out Rachel's husband." The offer was made with such casual superiority that I realized Tyler didn't see me as a threat at all. In his mind, I was just a temporary placeholder, someone Rachel had married out of misguided idealism, but would eventually come to her senses about. He was already positioning himself as the generous benefactor, ready to help the poor restaurant worker who was clearly in over his head. As the last guests filtered out of the reception and Rachel and I finally made our way up to the honeymoon suite the hotel had provided as part of our wedding package, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything in my life was about to change. Rachel was quiet in the elevator, exhausted from the long day, but also distant in a way that had nothing to do with fatigue. "Did you have a good time tonight?" I asked as we entered the luxurious suite, with its rose petals scattered across the king-size bed and champagne chilling in an ice bucket by the window. Rachel kicked off her heels and sank into the plush armchair by the fireplace, suddenly. Looking much younger than her 25 years, "It was beautiful, David. Everything we planned for." But she didn't sound happy about it. She sounded like someone who had just realized she'd made a terrible mistake and wasn't sure how to fix it. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my tuxedo, and looked at the woman I'd just married, wondering if I really knew her at all. "Rachel, can I ask you something?" I said carefully. "Are you having second thoughts about us?" She looked up, sharply, surprise and guilt flickering across her features before she quickly composed herself. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you seemed different tonight, distant, like your mind was somewhere else." Rachel was quiet for a long moment, twisting her wedding ring again in the gesture I was already coming to recognize as a sign of her internal conflict. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "David, do you ever wonder if we're too different? If maybe we want different things out of life?" The question hung between us like a loaded gun, and I realized that our marriage was already over before our honeymoon had even begun. The flight to Santorini the next morning felt like attending my own funeral. Rachel sat beside me in the cramped economy seats, scrolling through her phone and responding to wedding congratulations on social media with enthusiasm that felt completely fake. Every few minutes, she'd show me a particularly sweet comment or funny photo from the reception, but her smiles never quite reached her eyes. "Look at this one from your cousin Marcus," she said, holding up her phone to show me a picture of us during the cake cutting. "He says we look like we're living in a fairy tale." I stared at the image of us from less than 24 hours ago. both of us beaming at the camera with what looked like genuine happiness. It was hard to believe that the couple in that photo was the same one sitting in stony silence 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, the Azure Bay. Resort in Santorini was everything the travel websites had promised, and more. Our suite overlooked the famous blue-domed churches and whitewashed buildings that made the Greek island one of the most romantic destinations in the world. The infinity pool seemed to blend seamlessly with the Aegean Sea, and the sunset views from our private terrace were supposed to be legendary. But none of it mattered when your new wife was clearly wishing she was anywhere else with anyone else. Rachel went through the motions of honeymoon enthusiasm for the first 2 days, posing for Instagram photos and exploring the local shops filled with handmade jewelry and traditional Greek pottery. But I could see her checking her phone constantly. Her face would light up in ways I hadn't seen since. Tyler's appearance at our wedding whenever certain notifications came through. On our third morning, while Rachel was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand with a text message. I wasn't planning to look, but the preview showed enough of the message to make my blood run cold. Thinking about you constantly. This situation is killing me. When can we? The rest was cut off, but I didn't need to see more. The sender was listed simply as T with a heart emoji, and the string of previous messages showed this wasn't their first conversation since the wedding. When Rachel emerged from the bathroom wrapped in the hotel's plush terry cloth robe, I was sitting on the balcony pretending to read a book about Greek mythology. She noticed her phone had been moved and shot me a quick, suspicious glance before checking her messages. "Everything okay?" I asked, not looking up from the page I'd been staring at without reading for the past 10 minutes. "Just Lisa checking in," she replied, but her fingers were flying across the keyboard as she typed what looked like a much longer response than a simple reply to her maid of honor would require. That afternoon, while we were supposedly enjoying a romantic lunch at a clifftop restaurant overlooking the caldera, Rachel excused herself to take a phone call that she claimed was from her mother. But through the restaurant's windows, I could see her pacing on the terrace with an animated expression that suggested this was not a casual check-in with family. When she returned to our table 20 minutes later, her cheeks were flushed and her eyes bright with an excitement that had been missing from our entire trip. "Sorry about that," she said, reaching for her wine glass with hands that trembled slightly. "Mom wanted to hear all about the resort and make sure we were having a good time. And are we?" I asked quietly. "Having a good time?" Smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "Of course we are. This place is incredible, David. I can't believe we're actually here." But she was lying, and we both knew it. The Rachel who had fallen in love with me 3 years ago would have been genuinely enchanted by the medieval villages and volcanic beaches of Santorini. This Rachel was counting down the hours until she could return to whatever was waiting for her back in Millbrook. That evening, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to pretend that our marriage wasn't disintegrating in real time, I chose to give Rachel the space she clearly needed to figure out what she really wanted. "I'm going to take a walk around the village," I announced after dinner. "Clear my head a bit. Why don't you relax here and maybe call your family? I know you've been wanting to check in with everyone." Relief flooded Rachel's face so obviously that it was almost insulting. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel like you have to entertain yourself." "I'm sure," I replied. "All the time you need." I left the resort and wandered through the narrow cobblestone streets of OIA, past the tourist shops and traditional tavernas, until I found a quiet bar where I could nurse a beer and think about what I was going to do with the rest of my life. My marriage was clearly over before it had even begun, but I wasn't sure how to process the magnitude of what that meant. As I sat there watching the famous Santorini sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, my phone rang. The caller, ID showed my best friend Marcus calling from Connecticut, and I almost didn't answer. The last thing I wanted was to explain to anyone back home that my honeymoon was turning into a disaster. "David, thank God you picked up," Marcus said before I could even say hello. "I've been trying to reach you all day. Something's happened that you need to know about." "What kind of something?" I asked, though part of me already suspected it had to do with Tyler Brooks. "It's about Rachel's ex-boyfriend," Marcus continued. "Tyler, I did some digging after the wedding because something about him rubbed me the wrong way. And David, The guy's not who he's pretending to be. I sat up straighter in my chair. What do you mean? I mean, he's not some successful car salesman driving around in six-figure vehicles, Marcus said. It's a Lamborghini he showed up to your wedding in. It belongs to the dealership. It's allowed. To drive the demo cars home on weekends is part of his sales position, but he doesn't actually own any of them. In his luxury apartment that he was bragging about to Rachel's family, it's a studio above his parents' garage that he's been renting for $200 a month since he moved back to town. The information hit me like a physical blow, not because I cared about Tyler's financial situation, but because of what it revealed about Rachel's judgment and priorities. She was ready to throw away our marriage for a man who was essentially living a lie. Someone who was even less financially stable than I was. How did you find all this out? I asked. My cousin works at the bank where Tyler applied for a car loan last month, Marcus explained. The application was rejected because his actual income is barely above minimum wage. He makes most of his money from small commissions on used car sales, not the luxury vehicles he pretends to specialize in. I thanked Marcus for the information and hung up, my mind racing with the implications of what I'd just learned. Rachel was destroying our marriage for a fantasy, chasing after a man whose success was as fake as his designer clothes and borrowed luxury cars. But more than that, Tyler's deception revealed something darker about his character. He was deliberately manipulating Rachel, using her shallow values and social insecurities to draw her away from a stable relationship with someone who genuinely loved her. He was playing on her fears about settling for less than she deserved, all while offering her a lifestyle that was just as much of an illusion as the one she was running from. When I returned to our suite an hour later, I found Rachel curled up on the bed with her laptop, video chatting with someone whose face I couldn't see from the doorway. But I could hear Tyler's voice coming through the speakers, low and intimate in a way that made my stomach turn. I miss you so much, he was saying. This whole situation is torture.
Ow.
Knowing you're there with him when you should be here with me, I know, Rachel replied, her voice thick with emotion. I made such a huge mistake, Tyler. I should have waited. I should have given us another chance instead of settling for something safe. I backed away from the bedroom door before they could see me, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and betrayal that threatened to overwhelm me. But underneath those emotions was something else, something that surprised me with its clarity. Relief. For months, I'd been questioning whether I was good enough for Rachel, whether I could provide the kind of life she deserved, whether our love was strong enough to overcome the differences in our backgrounds. But listening to her describe our relationship as settling for something safe finally gave me the perspective I needed. Rachel didn't love me. She never had, not really. She loved the idea of me, the story she could tell herself about choosing substance over superficiality. But when faced with what she perceived as a better option, she was ready to abandon everything we'd built together without a second thought. More importantly, I realized that I deserved better than someone who would betray me so casually, someone whose love was conditional on my ability to compete with whatever shiny alternative presented itself. I deserved a partner who chose me not because I was safe or convenient, but because they couldn't imagine being with anyone else. The next morning, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier, instead of confronting Rachel about her ongoing affair or trying to fight for a marriage that was already dead. I chose to give her exactly what she wanted. Rachel, I said over breakfast on our terrace, watching her face carefully as she looked up from her phone. I think we need to talk about what's really going on between us. She set down her phone with shaking hands, her face going pale. What do you mean? I think we both know this isn't working, I said gently. You're not happy, and pretending otherwise isn't fair to either of us. For a moment, Rachel looked like she might deny it, might try to salvage what was left of our marriage, with promises and explanations. But then her shoulders sagged with relief, and I saw the real Rachel for perhaps the first time since our wedding day. David, I'm so sorry, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. You're right. I'm not happy, and I don't know how to fix it. Maybe it can't be fixed, I said. Maybe we just want different things. Rachel nodded miserably. I thought I could be the person you needed me to be. I thought love would be enough. But Tyler's back and seeing him again made me realize that I never really got over him. I know that's terrible to say after we just got married, but I can't lie to you. Any more? I reached across the table and took her hand, surprised by how calm I felt in the face of her confession. I appreciate your honesty. And Rachel, I want you to be happy, even if it's not with me. Relief flooded her face so completely that it was almost insulting, but I found I didn't care anymore. Rachel's happiness was no longer my responsibility, and that realization was more liberating than I'd expected. What do we do now? She asked. Now, I said, standing up from the breakfast table, you call Tyler and tell him you're coming home early? And I make some calls of my own. As Rachel hurried inside to arrange her early departure from our honeymoon, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. It was time to let some people know that my marriage was over, and that I was finally ready to stop pretending to be someone I wasn't. The first call I made from our Santorini balcony wasn't to a lawyer or my parents, or even my best friend Marcus. It was to Emma Martinez, Rachel's younger sister, who was finishing her master's degree in environmental science at Yale University. Emma had always been the black sheep of the Martinez family, more interested in marine conservation than country. Club memberships, more focused on her research than her social media presence. David! Emma's voice came through clearly, despite the international connection. Aren't you supposed to be on your honeymoon? Is everything okay? Emma was 3 years younger than Rachel, but in many ways, she'd always seemed more mature. Where Rachel had spent college rushing sororities and attending charity galas, Emma had spent her undergraduate years studying abroad in Costa Rica and volunteering with environmental organizations. She was the only member of Rachel's family who had ever treated me as an equal rather than someone to be politely tolerated. Emma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. I said, watching the Aegean Sea stretch endlessly toward the horizon. How long have you known about Rachel and Tyler? There was a long pause on the other end of the line, followed by a heavy sigh. David, I was hoping you'd never have to find out. So you've known all along? Not all along, Emma said carefully. But I suspected something was going on when Tyler came to Mom and Dad's anniversary party last month. Rachel claimed she'd run into him by accident at the country club, but the way they looked at each other, it was obvious there was still something there. The anniversary party had been 2 weeks before our wedding. Rachel had come home that night, unusually quiet and distant, claiming she was just tired from socializing. Seemed so preoccupied. Why didn't you say anything? I asked, though I wasn't sure I blamed Emma for staying out of her sister's business. Because I hoped I was wrong, Emma replied, and because I knew Rachel would never forgive me if I interfered in her relationship. But David, if it helps at all, I think you're better off without her. I love my sister, but she's always been selfish and impulsive. She makes decisions based on what looks good on Instagram rather than what's actually good for her life. The conversation with Emma lasted another 20 minutes, during which she filled in gaps I hadn't even known existed. Tyler had been texting Rachel sporadically for months, long before their supposed accidental meeting at the country club. Rachel had been lying to her family about her happiness in our relationship, confiding to Emma that she sometimes felt like she was playing house with me rather than building a real future. Most importantly, Emma revealed something that changed my entire perspective on the situation. David, there's something else you should know about Tyler. He's not the successful businessman he's pretending to be. His car dealership job is basically entry level, and he's been borrowing money from different people around town to maintain his lifestyle. My dad's financial advisor mentioned that Tyler tried to get him to invest in some kind of get-rich-quick scheme last month. After hanging up with Emma, I sat on the balcony for a long time, processing everything I'd learned. Rachel was destroying our marriage for a man who was not only financially unstable, but actively trying to scam her father's business associates. The irony was almost too painful to contemplate. My second call was to my lawyer back in Millbrook, a family friend named Robert Kim, who had helped my parents with the restaurant's legal paperwork over the years. I explained the situation as succinctly as possible and asked about the fastest way to get an annulment in Connecticut. David, I'm so sorry this is happening, Robert said. But I have to ask, are you sure this is what you want? Marriage counseling might be worth trying before you make any permanent decisions. Robert, she's been having an affair since before our wedding, I replied. "There's nothing left to counsel. The legal process would take time." But Robert assured me that given the circumstances, an annulment was definitely possible. More importantly, he mentioned something that hadn't occurred to me, since Rachel had been dishonest about her intentions when we married. There might be grounds to recover some of the wedding expenses. My third call was the most difficult one I'd ever made. I dialed my parents' number, knowing they'd be working the lunch rush at Golden Dragon, but needing to hear their voices before I lost my nerve. "David." My mother's voice was filled with immediate concern. "Why are you calling? Are you and Rachel having a good time?" "Mom, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be hard to hear." I explained the situation as gently as I could. Watching through the sliding glass doors, as Rachel frantically packed her suitcase while talking animatedly on her phone, my mother listened in stunned silence, occasionally making small sounds of distress that broke my heart. "Oh, my son," she finally said when I'd finished. "I'm so sorry. We thought Rachel was a good girl. We thought she loved you." "She did. Love me. In her way," I said, surprised to find that I meant it. But not enough to choose me over what she thought was a better option. My father took the phone then, his English still heavily accented but his meaning crystal clear. "You come home now. Family, take care of family. Restaurant can wait." "I'm not coming home yet, Dad," I said. "I have some things I need to take care of first." After ending the call with my parents, I made one final phone call that would set everything in motion. I called the resort's concierge and asked about extending my stay for another week, but moving to a different room. Rachel could take the original flight home as planned, but I had decided to finish the honeymoon alone, using the time to plan my next moves. When Rachel emerged from the bedroom with her packed suitcase, she looked like a woman who had just been released from prison. Her face was bright with anticipation, and she was practically bouncing on her toes with excitement about getting back to Tyler. "I managed to get on a flight tonight," she announced. "I know this is awkward, but I really appreciate you being so understanding about this. David, you're a good man, and you deserve someone who can love you the way you deserve to be loved." The words might have been meant as comfort, but they felt more like insults delivered with a smile. Rachel was so eager to get back to her fantasy romance that she couldn't even pretend to feel guilty about destroying our marriage. "Before you go," I said, "there's something I want to give you." I handed her an envelope that contained a printout of Tyler's loan application rejection that Marcus had managed to get from his cousin at the bank. Rachel opened it with curiosity that quickly turned to confusion, and then to horror as she read the details of Tyler's actual financial situation. "This can't be right," she said, her voice shaking. "Tyler said he was making 6 figures, said he was looking at buying his own dealership. The Lamborghini belongs to his employer," I said gently. "The luxury apartment is a studio above, his parents' garage. The expensive suits are probably rented or bought on credit cards he can't afford to pay off." Rachel sank onto the edge of the bed, the papers trembling in her hands. "But why would he lie about all this?" "I think you know why," I replied. "It's the same reason you're leaving me for him. Because sometimes people fall in love with an idea, rather than a person." For a moment, I thought Rachel might change her mind. I realized that she was about to make a terrible mistake. But then her phone buzzed with what was undoubtedly another text from Tyler, and her face hardened with determination. "This doesn't change anything," she said, stuffing the papers into her purse. "Money isn't everything, David. You taught me that. Maybe Tyler doesn't have as much as I thought, but at least he makes me feel alive. At least when I'm with him, I feel like I'm living instead of just existing." The accusation stung because there was a grain of truth in it. Our relationship had been comfortable and stable, but perhaps it hadn't been passionate in the way Rachel needed. Still, I couldn't help but point out the obvious flaw in her reasoning. "Rachel, you're leaving me because you thought Tyler was successful? Money doesn't matter? Why didn't you stay with me in the first place?" She didn't have an answer. For that, which told me everything I needed to know about her character and her capacity for self-reflection. Rachel had convinced herself that Tyler represented passion and excitement, when really he just represented the same materialistic values she'd always held but had been trying to suppress during our relationship. An hour later, I drove Rachel to the Santorini airport in our rental car, both of us quiet during the 20-minute journey through the winding mountain roads. At the departure gate, she turned to me with tears in her eyes and tried one more time to justify her actions. David, I hope someday you'll understand that this isn't about you not being good enough. You're wonderful, and you're going to make someone very happy. We're just not right for each other. I understand more than you think, I replied, and I meant it. Have a safe flight, Rachel. Hope Tyler makes you as happy as you think he will. After watching her plane taxi down the runway, I drove back to the resort and checked into a smaller, but still beautiful room overlooking the village of Oja. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. The weight of trying to be enough for someone who would never be satisfied had been lifted from my shoulders. That evening, I had dinner alone at a traditional Greek taverna, savoring the local wine and fresh seafood while watching the sunset that Rachel and I were supposed to have enjoyed together. But instead of feeling sorry for myself, I found myself making plans. The next morning, I called Emma again, this time with a proposition that would surprise everyone involved. I know this is going to sound crazy, I said, but how would you feel about joining me for the rest of my honeymoon? As friends, obviously. You've been working so hard on your thesis, and you mentioned that you've always wanted to visit the Greek islands for your marine research. Emma was quiet for a long moment before laughing in a way that sounded exactly like her sister, but somehow warmer and more genuine. David, are you asking me to crash your honeymoon? I'm asking you to help me salvage what's left of a very expensive vacation, I replied. And maybe help me figure out what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. You know what, Emma said. I think that sounds perfect. My thesis can wait a week, and I could definitely use some Mediterranean sun and Greek food. Plus, someone needs to make sure you don't spend your entire honeymoon feeling sorry for yourself. As I hung up the phone and began making arrangements for Emma's travel, I realized that for the first time since my wedding day, I was actually looking forward to something. Rachel might have chosen Tyler over me, but I was about to discover that her sister was everything Rachel had never been: genuine, loyal, and incapable of loving someone for anything other than who they really were. The week that followed would change everything I thought I knew about love, family, and what it meant to choose the right person for the right reasons. Emma arrived in Santorini 3 days later, stepping off the ferry with a backpack, a bright smile, and an energy that immediately transformed the entire atmosphere of my failed honeymoon. Where Rachel had spent her time posing for photos and complaining about the Wi-Fi connection, Emma was genuinely excited about everything from the local archaeology to the volcanic soil composition of the island's famous vineyards. David, this place is incredible, she said as we walked through the narrow streets of Oya toward her hotel. I can't believe Rachel left early. She always was terrible at appreciating what she had. Spending time with Emma was like rediscovering what it meant to enjoy someone's company without constantly worrying about whether I was measuring up to their expectations. She was fascinated by my stories about growing up in my family's restaurant, asking detailed questions about Chinese cooking techniques and my parents' immigration journey that Rachel had never shown any interest in. You know what's funny? Emma said over dinner at a seaside taverna on our second evening together. Rachel always talked about you like you were this sweet but limited guy who worked at a restaurant. She never mentioned that you speak 3 languages, or that you have a business degree, or that you've been essentially running the operations side of Golden Dragon since you were 18. The observation stung because it was accurate. Rachel had always introduced me as someone who helped out at his family's restaurant, rather than someone who had been instrumental in modernizing their systems and expanding their customer base. She'd diminished my accomplishments in the same way. She'd diminished my potential. Rachel sees what she wants to see, I replied. Apparently what she wanted to see was someone safe and boring, who she could leave behind when something better came along. Emma shook her head with the frustration of someone who had watched her sister make poor decisions for years. She's going to regret this, David? Maybe not immediately, because she's too caught up in the drama, in excitement of rekindling something with Tyler. But eventually she's going to realize that she gave up something real for something fake. Emma's words proved prophetic sooner than either of us expected. On our 4th day together, while we were exploring the ancient ruins of Akrotiri, my phone buzzed with a series of increasingly frantic text messages from Rachel. David, I made a terrible mistake. Tyler isn't who I thought he was. Please call me. I found out about the car and the apartment. Everything was a lie. He asked me to loan him money for his business expansion on our second date. He was using me. Please don't hate me. I need to talk to you. Emma read the messages over my shoulder and rolled her eyes. That didn't take long. What are you going to do? Nothing, I said, turning off my phone. Rachel made her choice. Now she gets to live with the consequences. The rest of our week in Santorini passed like a dream. Emma and I explored ancient churches, hiked volcanic trails, and spent hours talking about everything from marine biology to restaurant management to our shared love of terrible romantic comedies. There was no pressure, no judgment, no sense that I needed to be anyone other than exactly who I was. On our last night, as we watched the sunset from the terrace of my hotel, Emma said something that changed everything. David, I have a confession to make. I didn't come to Santorini just to help you get over Rachel. What do you mean? Emma turned to face me, her expression serious but warm. I've had a crush on you since the day Rachel first brought you home to meet our family. You were so kind to our housekeeper when she spilled wine on your shirt, so patient with our grandfather when he kept asking you the same questions about China. I thought you were the most genuinely good person I'd ever met. The revelation should have been awkward, but instead it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Looking at Emma in the golden light of the Greek sunset, I realized that everything I'd thought I'd loved about Rachel was actually a pale imitation of what Emma represented. Where Rachel was surface-level charm, Emma was depth. Where Rachel was conditional affection, Emma offered acceptance. Where Rachel saw potential projects, Emma saw people worth loving exactly as they were. Emma, I said carefully, you know I'm still technically married to your sister? For now, she replied with a smile that was both sad and hopeful. Not forever. And when you're ready, if you're ready, I'll be here. We returned to Connecticut the next day. The contrast between Emma's genuine excitement about everything we'd experienced together and Rachel's social media posts about her complicated romantic situation was stark. Rachel had been posting cryptic quotes about learning to trust again and not all that glitters is gold, clearly trying to salvage her image after Tyler's deception. The annulment proceedings moved faster than expected, helped by Rachel's eagerness to end our marriage and Tyler's complete disappearance from Millbrook once word got out about his financial lies. Apparently, he'd skipped town owing money to several people, including Rachel's father, who had lent him $5,000 for what Tyler claimed was a can't-miss investment opportunity. 6 months later, Emma and I had our first official date at Golden Dragon, where my parents treated her like the daughter they'd always wanted. She helped them redesign their menu with more environmentally sustainable options and convinced them to start a small herb garden behind the restaurant. You know what the best part about this is? Emma said as we walked through the garden she'd helped plant, pointing out the different varieties of basil and cilantro that were thriving in the Connecticut soil. What's that? Rachel still doesn't understand why you chose me over trying to win her back. She called me last week asking if I thought you were dating someone new, completely oblivious to the fact that her own sister had been right in front of her the whole time. 1 year after my wedding to Rachel, Emma and I got engaged in the same Santorini hotel where we'd first fallen in love. This time, there were no doubts, no second thoughts. No wondering if we were settling for something safe rather than something spectacular. Emma chose me not despite my background, but because of it. Not in spite of my family's modest means, but because she respected the values that had shaped me. Our wedding was small and intimate, held in the garden behind Golden Dragon with just our closest family and friends in attendance. Rachel wasn't invited, though. We heard through mutual friends that she was dating a series of increasingly unsuccessful men while posting inspirational quotes about knowing your worth and never settling for less than you deserve. I watched. Emma walked down the aisle between the herb gardens she'd planted, wearing a simple dress she'd chosen because it made her feel beautiful rather than because it would photograph well. I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't elaborate or dramatic. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well with someone who chooses you for all the right reasons. Tyler never returned to Millbrook, though rumors occasionally surfaced about his failed schemes in other towns. Rachel eventually moved to Boston, where she worked in social media marketing and continued her pattern of choosing flash over substance in both her career and her relationships. But Emma and I built something real together, something that grew stronger rather than more fragile over time. We expanded Golden Dragon into a small chain of sustainable restaurants, traveled the world together, documenting marine conservation efforts, and raised children who learned early that true wealth has nothing to do with bank account balances and everything to do with being surrounded by people who love you unconditionally. The best part was knowing that every day I woke up next to someone who had chosen me not as a backup plan or a safe option, but as the person she couldn't imagine living without. That's the kind of love worth waiting for, and the kind of revenge that writes itself. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.